The smoke was already black when Julia Harper gave the order to pull back. I watched her standing there in her tailored gray suit, phone pressed to her ear, calculating losses while her daughter's screams echoed from the third floor of the Harper Industries warehouse. 27 years as a firefighter, and I'd never seen a mother look at a burning building the way she did. Like it was a spreadsheet with a column that didn't balance. Like the flames were consuming inventory rather than her only child. "Everyone out," she said into the phone, her voice steady as stone. "The insurance will cover the inventory. I need the structural assessment before we file the claim." My crew was already retreating, following protocol, following orders from the woman who signed the checks that funded our volunteer station. But somewhere above us, behind walls of flame and decades of neglected sprinkler systems, a 7-year-old girl named Lily was trapped in the executive daycare that Julia Harper had built to keep her daughter close while she worked. Close, but apparently not close enough to matter when the numbers stopped adding up. "Ma'am," I said, stepping toward her, "your daughter is still in there." Julia's eyes flickered to mine, and for just a moment I saw something human beneath the polish. Fear, maybe. Or the memory of fear, long since buried under quarterly reports and shareholder meetings and the relentless machinery of corporate ambition. "The structural engineer says we have 6 minutes before the east wall fails," she said, each word precise and measured. "The stairwell to the third floor is already compromised. The fire suppression system failed catastrophically. The math doesn't work, Mr. Powell." The math. I thought about my own daughter, Emma, waiting at home with Mrs. Chen from next door, probably doing her homework at the kitchen table Sarah had picked out 3 years before the cancer took her. Emma was 8 years old and still slept with the stuffed elephant her mother gave her the week before she died. Every night she asked me to come home safe. Every night I promised I would. I thought about what it would mean to break that promise, to leave her alone in the world the way I'd been left when my own father died fighting a fire in the old textile mill 30 years ago. I knew the weight of that loss, had carried it every day of my adult life, and I knew I couldn't put that same weight on my daughter's shoulders. But I also knew something else, something that burned in my chest hotter than any fire I'd ever faced. "The math," I repeated, and something in my voice made Julia take a step back. "Ma'am, with respect, that's your little girl up there. That's not a line item on your insurance claim. That's a child." "I'm aware of what she is." Julia's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering beneath the porcelain perfection of her skin. "I'm also aware that sending more men into an unstable structure won't bring her back. It will only add to the casualty count. I won't authorize it." Around us, my crew was loading equipment back onto the trucks. The other firefighters from the county station were already gone, called away to a secondary blaze that had started in the industrial district. We were a volunteer unit, underfunded and understaffed, and Julia Harper's annual donation was the only reason we had working equipment at all. She owned us. She owned half the town, and right now she was telling us to let her daughter burn. I looked up at the third floor where the windows had begun to glow orange from within. The screaming had stopped a few minutes ago, which meant Lily had either lost consciousness from the smoke or found somewhere to shelter. Either way, time was running out. Every second that passed was a second closer to the moment when that little girl would stop being someone who could be saved and start being someone who could only be mourned. I thought about what Sarah would say if she could see me now. She'd been a pediatric nurse, spent her whole career fighting for children who couldn't fight for themselves. She'd held the hands of dying kids and comforted their parents and never once looked away from the hard things. On her last night, delirious with morphine but somehow still present, she'd grabbed my hand and made me promise to keep being the man she'd married. The man who ran toward trouble when everyone else ran away. The man who believed that some things mattered more than survival. "I'm going in," I said. Julia's head snapped toward me. "I just told you I won't authorize." "Then don't." I was already moving toward the building, pulling my mask down, checking my oxygen levels. "Fire me afterward. Sue me. Do whatever you need to do. But I'm not leaving a child to die because the math doesn't work. Mr. Powell." Her voice had an edge now, something sharper than corporate authority. "Jack, you have a daughter too. Think about what you're risking. I stopped at the entrance to the building where the heat was already pressing against my turnout gear like a living thing trying to push me back. She was right. Emma needed me. Emma had already lost one parent, and the thought of leaving her alone in the world was the only thing that had ever made me hesitate in 27 years of running into burning buildings. But I also knew that I couldn't go home to my daughter if I left someone else's daughter to die. I couldn't look Emma in the eyes and tell her that her daddy was a hero when I knew the truth. I couldn't teach her that love meant anything if I was willing to let a child burn because her mother had decided she wasn't worth the risk. I think about her every day, I said, not turning around. That's exactly why I have to do this. The building swallowed me whole. Inside, the world became a nightmare of smoke and shadow. The familiar geometry of the warehouse transformed into something alien and hostile. The main floor was mostly clear, the fire having started in the storage area on the east side, but the stairwell was a column of flame that roared upward like a chimney. I couldn't use it. I'd be dead before I reached the second floor. I scanned the space, looking for alternatives, my training taking over even as my heart hammered against my ribs. The freight elevator was out of the question, its cables already glowing red from the heat, but in the corner near the loading dock I spotted what I was looking for, the old service ladder that maintenance crews used to access the upper catwalks. It was meant for light repair work, not rescue operations, but it ran along the exterior wall, away from the worst of the fire. It might hold long enough to get me up. Might. The climb was brutal. My gear weighed 40 pounds, and every rung of the ladder groaned under the strain. Twice I felt the metal shift beneath me, bolts loosening in brackets that hadn't been inspected in years. Julia Harper's warehouse, I thought bitterly. Julia Harper's maintenance budget. Julia Harper's daughter, trapped because nobody had bothered to check the fire suppression systems since they were first installed. The heat grew more intense as I climbed, the air thickening until each breath felt like swallowing fire. My mask filtered out the worst of the smoke, but I could feel the temperature rising with every foot of elevation. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes, making my grip slippery on the metal rungs. I thought about Emma, about the way she'd looked at me this morning when I dropped her off at school, her face bright with the simple trust that children have before the world teaches them to doubt. I thought about the promise I'd made to come home safe, and I kept climbing. I reached the third-floor catwalk just as a section of the roof collapsed behind me, sending a shower of sparks and burning debris raining down into the darkness below. The catwalk itself was still intact, but the heat was intense enough that I could feel it through my gloves, through the layers of protective material that were supposed to keep me safe. The executive daycare was on the far side of the floor, separated from the main warehouse by a wall of glass that had shattered in the heat. Through the smoke, I could see the colorful shapes of children's furniture, the bright murals painted on the walls, all of it blackening and curling as the fire crept closer. And there, huddled in the corner beneath an overturned table, I saw her. Lily Harper was smaller than I expected, a wisp of a child with dark hair and her mother's sharp features. She'd pulled her sweater over her face to filter the smoke, her eyes squeezed shut, her body curled into the tightest ball she could manage. Smart girl, brave girl, just like Emma would be if Emma were the one trapped in hell while her mother calculated acceptable losses. "Lily," I called out, moving toward her as quickly as I dared. The floor was unstable, groaning with each step, and I could feel the structure beginning to fail beneath us. "Lily, I'm a firefighter. I'm here to get you out." Her eyes opened, wide and terrified, and for a moment she didn't move. Then she saw my uniform, my helmet, the oxygen tank on my back, and something in her face shifted from fear to hope, from despair to belief. "My mommy said no one was coming," she whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow. 5 simple words that told me everything I needed to know about Julia Harper's love for her daughter. Everything I needed to know about the kind of mother who could stand outside a burning building and calculate acceptable losses while her child screamed for help. "Your mommy was wrong," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I'm here. I'm going to carry you out. But I need you to be very brave for me, okay? Can you do that?" She nodded, and I scooped her up in my arms, pressing her face against my shoulder to shield her from the smoke. She weighed almost nothing, this girl who owned half the town by birthright, and her arms wrapped around my neck with a desperate strength that reminded me of Emma during her worst nightmares. The way back was worse than the way in. The catwalk had begun to buckle, the metal glowing cherry red in places, and I had to move faster than safety allowed. Lily whimpered against my chest, but didn't scream, didn't struggle, just held on with the same fierce determination I'd seen in children who understood that their survival depended on trusting the adults trying to save them. We reached the service ladder just as the floor behind us gave way, collapsing into the inferno below with a sound like the end of the world. I looked down at the 20-foot drop beneath us, at the flames licking at the base of the ladder, and I made a decision. Lily, I need you to climb onto my back and hold on tight. Can you do that? Wrap your arms around my neck and your legs around my waist and don't let go no matter what. She did as I asked, her small body pressed against my back, her breath hot against my ear. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, sweetheart. Me too. But we're going to make it. I promise. The descent was the longest 3 minutes of my life. Every rung felt like it might be the last, every creak of metal a warning that time was running out. Halfway down, I felt the ladder shift, one of the upper brackets giving way, and for one terrible moment we hung suspended over the abyss, nothing between us and the fire below but my grip on a piece of metal that was slowly pulling free from the wall. Then my foot found the next rung, and the next, and somehow we kept moving, kept surviving, kept falling toward the ground one precarious step at a time. We burst out of the building just as the east wall collapsed. The sound was deafening, a roar of destruction that seemed to shake the very earth beneath our feet, and I threw myself forward, shielding Lily's body with my own as debris rained down around us. When the dust settled, I looked up to find Julia Harper standing exactly where I'd left her, phone still in her hand, face pale as ash. Behind her, my crew was running toward us, shouting my name, but I couldn't hear them over the ringing in my ears. I could only see Julia staring at her daughter as if she'd never seen her before, as if she'd already grieved her loss and moved on, as if bringing her back was an outcome she hadn't planned for. Lily, Julia said, and there was something strange in her voice. Not relief, not joy, something closer to calculation, like she was reassessing a variable in an equation she thought she'd already solved. Mommy. Lily struggled out of my arms and ran to her mother, throwing herself against Julia's legs with the desperate need of a child who still believed her mother loved her. Mommy, he saved me. The fireman saved me. You said no one was coming, but he came anyway. Julia's hand came to rest on her daughter's head, an automatic gesture, the kind of touch that looked right but felt hollow. Her eyes met mine over Lily's dark hair, and in them I saw something that made my blood run cold. Not gratitude, not shame, annoyance. I had disrupted her calculations. I had introduced a variable she hadn't accounted for, saved an asset she'd already written off, and now she would have to adjust her spreadsheet to accommodate the inconvenient reality that her daughter was still alive. In that moment, I understood Julia Harper more clearly than I'd understood anyone in my life. She wasn't evil, not in the way most people imagine evil. She was simply broken, hollowed out by ambition until there was nothing left inside but numbers and outcomes, cost-benefit analyses, and acceptable losses. She had built an empire by treating everything, everyone, as a transaction, even her own child, even her own heart. Thank you, Mr. Powell, she said, and the words were as empty as her eyes. I'll make sure your station receives an additional donation this year for your initiative. I looked at Lily, still clinging to her mother's legs, still believing that the woman above her loved her the way mothers are supposed to love their daughters. She was 7 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. And unless something changed, she would spend that life learning that she was just another line item in her mother's ledger, worth exactly as much as the insurance payout she would have generated. Keep your money, I said, and I turned away before Julia could respond. I drove home that night with the ash still in my lungs and Julia Harper's empty eyes burned into my memory. Mrs. Chen was asleep on the couch when I walked in, the TV playing some late-night infomercial, and I found Emma in her bed, curled around her stuffed elephant, her face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. I sat on the edge of her mattress and watched her breathe, in and out, the simple miracle of her existence filling the room like sunlight. "Daddy?" She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "You're home late." "I know, baby, I'm sorry. There was a fire." "Did you save everyone?" I thought about Lily Harper, about the look in her eyes when I'd told her that her mommy was wrong, that someone was coming for her. About the way she'd clung to me during the descent, trusting me with her life the way children trust the adults who are supposed to protect them. "I saved everyone I could," I said, and it was almost the truth. Emma nodded, satisfied, and reached up to touch my face. Her fingers came away gray with soot, and she giggled. "You smell like smoke." "I probably do." "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "I'll stay as long as you need me, sweetheart. Always." I held her hand until her breathing deepened and her grip relaxed, and then I sat there in the darkness for a long time, thinking about the women who had shaped my life. Sarah, who had taught me that love was a verb, something you did every day in small and ordinary ways. And Julia Harper, who had taught me in one terrible evening what love looked like when it had been replaced by something cold and calculating. I had saved her daughter, but I couldn't save her. The weeks that followed were strange and unsettling, like living in the aftermath of an earthquake. The town buzzed with stories about the warehouse fire, about the volunteer firefighter who had defied orders to save the CEO's daughter. Some people called me a hero, others called me reckless, pointed out that I could have been killed, that I had a child of my own to think about. The fire department received Julia's promised donation, a check large enough to replace all our aging equipment and then some. Captain Morrison called it a blessing. I called it blood money, though I never said so out loud. 3 weeks after the fire, I was walking Emma home from school when we saw them. Lily and Julia standing outside the elementary school, Julia's Mercedes idling at the curb while she spoke into her phone. Lily stood apart from her mother, shoulders hunched, watching the other children with a loneliness that was painful to witness. Emma noticed her before I could steer us in another direction. "Daddy, look, it's the girl from the fire, the one you saved." "How do you know about that?" Emma shrugged with the casual wisdom of an 8-year-old who heard everything adults said when they thought she wasn't listening. "Everyone knows. Can I go say hi?" Before I could answer, Emma was already moving, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she approached Lily with the fearless confidence of childhood. I watched as she introduced herself, as Lily's face transformed from wary suspicion to cautious interest to something that looked almost like hope. Within minutes, they were sitting on the school steps together, heads bent over something in Emma's backpack, their laughter ringing out across the playground. Julia finished her phone call and looked up, noticing me for the first time. Her expression flickered through several emotions too quickly to identify, settling finally on something like resignation. She walked toward me with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to controlling every room she entered. "Mr. Powell, I didn't realize your daughter attended Lily's school." "It's the only elementary in town." "No, I suppose it wouldn't be." Julia was quiet for a moment, watching our daughters on the steps. Emma was showing Lily something in her sketchbook, and Lily was leaning in with rapt attention, her loneliness temporarily forgotten. "She talks about you," Julia said finally. "Lily, she calls you the fireman who came when no one else would." I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. "She's never talked about anyone that way before, not even me." The silence between us stretched and grew. Finally, Julia spoke again, and this time her voice was different, smaller, more human. "I've been thinking about that night, about what you said, about the math not working. I remember. You were right." The words seemed to cost her something, pulled from a place she kept locked and guarded. "The math didn't work. It never has. I've spent my whole life treating everything like an equation, trying to optimize outcomes, minimize losses. I thought I was being rational, efficient, smart." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. But there is no equation for watching your daughter run toward you after you'd already written her off as dead. There is no spreadsheet that can calculate what that feels like. I looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time I saw something besides the cold corporate facade. I saw a woman who had built walls so high she couldn't remember what she was protecting herself from. A woman who had traded her humanity for success and was only now beginning to understand the terms of that bargain. "She's a good kid," I said. "Lily, brave, strong. She held on the whole way down, didn't cry, didn't panic. She trusted me to save her." Julia's jaw tightened. "She shouldn't have had to. I should have been the one to—" She broke off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. I can't change what I did that night, what I was willing to let happen." "No," I agreed. "You can't, but you can change what happens next." On the school steps, Emma was teaching Lily some kind of hand-clapping game, the two of them laughing as they fumbled through the pattern. The sound drifted toward us on the spring breeze, innocent and pure. "How?" Julia asked, sounding genuinely lost. "How do I change something I don't know how to do differently?" "Start small. Start with just being there. Not checking your phone, not thinking about work, just being present in the moment with your daughter." Julia looked at Lily like she was seeing her for the first time. "I don't know how to do that. I've never known how." "Then learn." I hesitated, then added, "Emma's been wanting to have a friend over for a play date. If Lily's interested, they could spend some time together, at our house." The offer surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise Julia. But watching our daughters on those steps, watching the way Lily's face had transformed in Emma's presence, I knew it was the right thing to do. Sometimes the people who look like they have everything are the ones who need the most help. "I'd like that," Julia said slowly. "I think Lily would too." The playdate started that weekend, and something shifted in the fabric of our small town. Emma and Lily became inseparable, the kind of fierce childhood friendship that felt like it had always existed. They did homework together at my kitchen table, built blanket forts in Emma's room, spent hours in the backyard catching fireflies and telling secrets. Julia was awkward at first, hovering in my doorway during drop-offs and pickups, clearly uncertain of the protocol for ordinary human interaction. But slowly, gradually, she began to soften. One afternoon, I found her sitting on my porch steps, watching the girls play in the yard, and there were tears on her cheeks. She didn't seem to notice them, didn't move to wipe them away. "She laughs differently here," Julia said when she noticed me. "I've never heard her laugh like that at home." "Maybe home feels different when there's nothing to laugh about. Kids know when they're being watched like investments, when every smile is being evaluated for ROI. Julia flinched, but she didn't deny it. "I thought I was protecting her, preparing her for the world the way it really is. I thought if I could just teach her to be strong enough, smart enough, careful enough, nothing could hurt her." "The world hurts everyone," I said, sitting beside her on the porch. "The only question is whether we hurt alone or together." She was quiet for a long time. "My parents died when I was 12. Car accident. I had to move in with my aunt, who made it very clear that I was a burden. I learned very quickly that the only person I could count on was myself, that depending on others was a weakness that would be exploited." That sounds like a lonely way to grow up. It was efficient. It got me through law school, business school, building a company from nothing. I didn't have time for loneliness. "And now?" Julia looked at me with exhaustion, I recognized. The same desperate hope I'd felt in the months after Sarah's death. "Now I have everything I ever wanted, and I almost let my daughter die because I didn't know how to want anything else." The confession hung between us. I thought about what Sarah would say, how she'd always seen the good in people even when they couldn't see it themselves. "My wife died 3 years ago," I said. "Cancer. For a long time afterward, I didn't know how to be anything but a father. I poured everything I had into Emma, into keeping her safe, into being the parent she needed. I thought that was enough." "It sounds like it was enough. Emma's an incredible kid." "She is, but she also learned to hide her grief because she could see that I couldn't handle it. She stopped talking about her mother because every time she did I fell apart. I thought I was being strong for her, but really I was teaching her that some feelings are too big to share. I watched the girls chase each other across the lawn. Kids learn what we show them. If we want them to be open and loving and unafraid, we have to be those things first, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Julia nodded slowly. And if she's disappointed in what she finds, if the mother underneath all the armor isn't worth knowing, then you work on becoming someone worth knowing. You make mistakes and apologize for them. You show up even when it's hard. You let her see you try. The birthday party became a turning point, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Julia threw herself into the planning with corporate intensity, but something was different about her energy. She asked Emma what she wanted instead of deciding for her. She listened to my suggestions, she made mistakes, and when she did, she apologized and tried again. The party was simple by Julia's standards, but perfect by Emma's. A backyard carnival with homemade games and a cake that Julia had actually baked herself, lopsided and decorated with more enthusiasm than skill. Lily helped her mother frost it, the two of them laughing as they got frosting everywhere. Emma ran up as the party wound down. "Daddy, this is the best birthday ever." I looked across the yard where Julia was helping children with a ring toss game, designer clothes splattered with frosting and grass stains. She looked nothing like the woman who had calculated acceptable losses while her daughter burned. Later, after Emma and Lily were asleep in a blanket fort, Julia and I sat on the porch. "I'm closing the company," she said quietly. "What?" "Harper Industries. I'm selling it. I spent 30 years building something that almost cost me everything that matters. I don't want to spend another 30 years making the same mistake." The months that followed transformed our small town. Julia became a regular presence at school events and community gatherings. She volunteered at the fire station. She took Lily camping, learned to cook, made mistakes, and tried again. The money from selling Harper Industries funded a community center, scholarships, a pediatric wing at the hospital. Julia didn't put her name on any of it. Emma and Lily remained inseparable. They started a club for kids whose parents had died or were absent, meeting weekly in our living room. Julia sat in on some meetings, not as a leader, but as a listener, learning from children who understood loss in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. And somewhere in all that change, something shifted between Julia and me. Not dramatic, not a single moment I could point to. More like spring arriving after a long winter. One evening, almost a year after the fire, Julia and I stood in the community garden she'd helped establish where the warehouse used to be. The building had been torn down, and in its place grew rows of vegetables and flowers. "I'm grateful," Julia said, "not just for saving Lily's life, for saving mine." "You saved yourself. I just opened the door." She turned to face me. "Jack, I know I don't deserve—" Stop talking about what you deserve. Start talking about what you want." "I want this," she whispered. "This life, these people, you." When I kissed her, it felt like the end of a long journey and the beginning of something I hadn't known I was waiting for. Behind us, Emma's voice, "Finally!" and Lily's, "I knew it!" 2 years later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, we gathered in that same garden for a wedding. Simple, the way Julia insisted. Emma was my best man. Lily was Julia's maid of honor. "You taught me that the math never works when you're calculating the value of a human heart," Julia said in her vows. "That love isn't a weakness. It's the only strength that matters." I took her hands. "Sarah used to say love was like fire. It could warm you or burn you depending on how you tended it. So that's what we're doing. Loving each other even when it's hard, because that's what family means." After the ceremony, Julia leaned her head against my shoulder. "Mom, Dad," Lily called. "Come dance with us." I looked at the life we'd built from ashes, the daughter I'd raised, the daughter I'd saved, the woman I'd married, the home we'd made in each other. We walked into the music and laughter, the beautiful chaos of being human together. And as I spun my wife across the dance floor while our daughters cheered, I thought about what Sarah had told Emma once. Love is like planting seeds. Sometimes it takes a long time to grow, but if you keep watering it, something beautiful happens. Looking at the life that had blossomed from the darkest night of Julia Harper's existence, I finally understood. The seeds we plant aren't always the ones we expect. Sometimes they grow in the most unlikely places, fed by tears instead of rain, nurtured by loss instead of plenty. But if we tend them with patience and courage and the stubborn refusal to give up, even when the math doesn't work, even when everyone else says it's too late, something beautiful happens, something that looks like redemption, something that feels like home. And in the garden grown from ashes, surrounded by the family we'd built from broken pieces and second chances, we danced until the stars came out, planting seeds we would spend the rest of our lives watching grow.